Well, today we are going to talk about omega-3 fatty acids. And we've invited a whole bunch of our friends. And so I wanted to just share, this is going to be part of an ongoing series that Paris and I are going to do, Dr. Kidd, who's our Chief Science Officer. And I just wanted to share our mission at BrainMD and Amen Clinics. And it's to transform psychiatry in a completely new way by adding imaging, natural ways to heal the brain in a functional medicine context. And we really want to end mental illness. And how are we going to do that? We're going to do it by creating a revolution in brain health. And BrainMD's part of that is to provide the products and services to enhance brain health and to teach people how to love and care for their brain. So that's part of what we're doing today, is teaching people to love and care for their brains. And BrainMD actually has a lot more products than just the ones on your screen. We're going to talk about our best-selling product, I think, of all time, Omega-3 Power, and then a new one that we're all very excited about, a liquid omega-3 that not only tastes like dessert, but is loaded with the type of omega-3s that support your brain. There are nutrient deficiencies in the modern world that should horrify all of us, from magnesium, choline, omega-3 fatty acids, which we'll talk about, vitamin C, D, and E, potassium, and iron. All of these, according to the CDC, are significantly low. And one of the reasons nutraceuticals are just part of a healthy person's life. I like showing this slide. This is probably one of the most impactful slides I have ever seen. And might as well fix this while we're at it. But just think of all the medications people are taking and how it depletes nutrients, from antacids, which are very common. Obviously, they decrease hydrochloric acid, calcium, phosphorus, folic acid, potassium, female hormones, and oral contraceptives. So the vast majority of adult women are taking oral contraceptives, but decreases folic acid, magnesium, B vitamins, vitamin C, zinc, selenium, CoQ10, serotonin. Oh no, that's why oral contraceptives increase the risk of depression 40%. And tyrosine, the building block for dopamine. Anti-diabetics, medication, CoQ10 and B12, antihypertensives, anti-inflammatory medications, and statins. In addition to carnitine, statins also decrease omega-3 fatty acids. And people go, oh, there's no science behind supplements. And Paris and I go, do you read? There's science behind magnesium, GABA, and theanine for anxiety, green tea, zinc, and rhodiola for focus. Saffron, our Happy Saffron product, is just killing it, doing a great job. SAMe, curcumins, omega-3 fatty acids for depression, ginkgo, phosphatidylserine, and huperzine A for memory. But today we're here to talk about omega-3 fatty acids, which has been found to support heart health, skin health, eyes, joints, brain, decrease appetite and cravings. And all of us should be taking about 2 to 3 grams a day. And Paris will talk about some of this, but I developed an omega-3 that would be highly concentrated because I don't like taking pills, no fish burps. And there are only 2 plants in the world that have the purity that ours has. So why is all this important? We can actually measure your omega-3 index. And so how healthy is it? And you want an omega-3 index above 8. And so I did a study at Amen Clinics in Costa Mesa where we did an omega-3 index on 50 consecutive patients who were not taking fish oil. And 49 of them had suboptimal levels. The only one that was normal is actually on this call, Michelle Walthall. She had a healthy level without taking fish oil, but 49 of 50. So that's 98% of people who are not taking omega-3 fatty acids have a suboptimal level according to the omega-3 index. So this is just sort of a random sample of these people. It was pretty terrible. So you want your index to be above 8. Now, this is a person actually who was in our marketing department who believed in supplements, who was actually taking 2 of a Costco brand, and his level still sucked. I guess that's not a clinical, his level was not good. These are people who were taking omega-3 power. This person was actually taking 4 a day. All the others were taking 2 a day. And one of these is actually mine. We also look at this number here. It's the AA, arachidonic acid, EPA ratio, which should be 3 and under. And all of these ratios are good. Where if we go back here, all of these ratios are a disaster. 23, this ratio is 70, 47, 27. Even on Costco's fish oil, its ratio is 16.9. And people go, oh, you can just take any fish oil, but if you look at the Kirkland brand, you actually have to take 3 times the number of pills to equal the EPA and DHA and omega-3 power. And Paris wanted me to talk about a study that he and I published in 2017, where we looked at 166 subjects. We had their scans, and we looked at those on the omega-3 index who were above the 50th percentile versus those who were below the 50th percentile. We looked at their scans and their cognitive function, and what we found, those above the 50th percentile had increased blood flow, in the parahippocampal region in the hippocampus. Most of you will know the hippocampus is the brain's major mood and memory center. And you want a healthy hippocampus because you want to be able to remember things. And it's a very dynamic part of the brain. It actually produces 700 new stem cells every day. And people know the hippocampus is Greek for seahorse. So I tell people, you're making 700 new baby seahorses every day. And, you want to nourish them so they can become part of the big seahorse. It's actually how I got Miley Cyrus to stop smoking pot, because she loves animals. And when I told her she was murdering the seahorses, the baby seahorses, she's like, that's so unfair. We also found they had higher subjective feelings of mood as well. And we published this in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. So just a little bit, Dr. Kidd is going to give you much more on how to know about and understand omega-3 fatty acids. So Paris, you're up.
Here we go.
Let me just, because we have a lot of new people. Many of you won't know Dr. Kidd. Paris is our chief science officer. I stalked him for 10 years, trying to get him to work with us. He was the chief science officer at Doctor's Best, but he's been in the supplement industry for 35 years. He's got a PhD in cell biology from UC Berkeley. People just know him around the world as a great teacher, a stellar researcher, and you'll learn today he's a wonderful teacher. So Paris, you're up.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, this is a topic, a category of product that I've been following since the 1980s. And it really is the best developed category of dietary supplements as far as the scientific justification goes, and as far as the number of studies go, and as far as the consensus exists between experts, even the most conservative among experts, that these are dietary supplements that should be in practically everyone's daily regimen. So thanks to Jim Springer, we made a connection to get an emulsified liquid version of the omega-3 power. And the way it worked out is that it's practically the exact same raw material, incredibly concentrated, incredibly well purified, tested for hundreds of different toxins, and tastes just really, really very pleasant. So this is going to be a product that anyone who doesn't like taking capsules will very likely enjoy taking. And what's in it then? A liquid emulsion of highly concentrated fish oil. So this is an oil and water emulsion, stable, beautiful mouthfeel, very pleasant flavor, and very well prepared for children and perhaps others who may be sensitive to the cosmetic effects of taking a supplement. None of the burpee reflux, very well tolerated, extracted from wild-caught, sustainably harvested fish off of the tip of South America, provides EPA and DHA in their natural triglyceride forms. Now, for those of you who are joining us for perhaps the first time, very important to understand that the omega-3s made by land plants do not include EPA and DHA. And the human body is very poor at converting omega-3s from land plants into EPA and DHA. And EPA and DHA are the only forms that have been proven to have biological activity in the body. So if you want to be sure you get EPA and DHA, then you have to either consume mostly cold water fish or supplements in order to get those two active omega-3s. The ratio of EPA to DHA is very important certainly for mood and perhaps for other psychological applications and brain applications. And the ratio in this supplement is 1.5 to 1, which is the same as we have in the omega-3 power soft gels. And this ratio has been the most successful in clinical trials. Each tablespoon delivers 1,500 milligrams of EPA plus DHA, which compares favorably to the 1,440 milligrams that you get from each two soft gels of omega-3 power. Now, a theme that I'm going to have in this short presentation is that you really need to take at least this amount daily. I even need more than 1,440 because I was taking that much for a while and my index was not going above 9. So I've now gone to taking 4. But I'm going to, I believe, establish with you why you have to take that much. So these intakes are very likely to improve the index. They may not take the index as high as you may want it to go. And individuals vary considerably. There's differences between a person who is within a relatively low range of BMI and a person who's overweight or obese. The heavier people don't absorb them as well. There's differences in how you take them with meals, better to take them with food. And then there are genetic differences. Different ethnic groups or different ethnic heritages vary in their ability to process these omega-3s. So really, the higher you go up to a certain level, the better it's going to work out. Now, here is the amount of research I'm talking about. And if Jim and some of the team wonder why I've been missing in action these last few days, it's because I've been going through literally hundreds of studies. The studies just keep pouring out. So in the past decade alone, there have been just about 14,000 studies published. And so you see that since the early years, when the idea first began to emerge, since the 60s, when it first began to emerge that Inuit people, Northern Arctic Circle people who consumed omega-3s from seals and whales and stuff had lower rates of cardiovascular disease, you see that over the decades, it's become more and more of an intense focus of research. And who can benefit from this supplement? First of all, everyone, because EPA and DHA are essential for our cells to work, period. Less than 10% of the American population is getting enough. In fact, worldwide, this observation applies. A small minority of people appear to be getting sufficient intakes to expect to get optimal benefit. So I wouldn't need to have anything more on this slide, except you know me, I am going to have more. Heart health, recommended by the American Heart Association, because they're important for heart rhythm and important overall for the electrical activity and pumping activity of the heart. For the circulation, they promote blood vessel tone. They tend to lower blood pressure in people who are hypertensive. And at sufficiently high intakes, they lower triglyceride levels. For mood, we can give the omega-3s a grade of A, in terms of the quality and consensus of the clinical trials. Meta-analyses of at least 23 randomized controlled trials indicate that they benefit mood. And since we're among friends, I can tell you that they benefit any type of mood problem, including depressions, and to a certain extent also mood in people with bipolar issues. For anxiety and stress, there are benefits in at least 19 randomized controlled trials. For cognitive decline, poor status of EPA and DHA, which can be measured as a low omega-3 index, more on that later, are linked to faster decline from midlife onwards into old age. So the less you're equipped with EPA and DHA, the more likely you are to go into a cognitive tailspin. For children's attention hyperactivity issues, there have been benefits in at least 16 randomized controlled double-blind trials. For brain development, this is really a huge story because so few women and so few pregnant women are getting enough. EPA and DHA are essential for development from the moment, first of all, for fertilization to be achieved, because they're essential for sperm activity. They're essential for the sperm and the egg to fuse. They're essential for the development of the brain and the heart and the other organs in the womb. And then they're essential for having a full-term pregnancy and essential for vision and cognitive and behavioral development after birth. And it's also been found that there's lower risks for allergies and asthma in children born to mothers who had more adequate levels of EPA and DHA. And for the immune system, the liver, the joints, the muscles, practically every organ system, for anyone who's having an issue with any of their organ systems, this is an incredibly good nutritional type of health insurance. To spend a few dollars on this type of highly concentrated, highly purified omega-3 supplement. So for the retina and vision, every time I see a little kid walking around with glasses, I wonder, did that kid get enough omega-3s during pregnancy or during breastfeeding, or even when they were being given formula or their early solid foods? Because the retina is loaded, especially with DHA, and EPA and DHA have improved retinal function in various trials. And retinal cells have a rare quality, a rare capacity to convert EPA to DHA. So for vision function, it's very, very important to have a sufficient supply of EPA and DHA. For the liver, there's a whole range of conditions called fatty liver, because the liver is the main organ that handles the metabolism of fats, when the liver doesn't work well, fats tend to build up in the liver, and then that can progress into fibrosis, into necrotic damage, fibrosis, cirrhosis, and then liver failure. So meta-analyses, that is pooling of data from clinical trials, indicate that EPA plus DHA can lower the buildup of fats in the liver. For the joints, this is really interesting. I'm going to leak a little disease term here. It's called rheumatoid arthritis. The omega-3s seem to be very, very important for autoimmune attack on the joints, including in rheumatoid conditions. So, two meta-analyses strongly indicate reductions in joint pain, morning stiffness, the number of tender joints, and the amount of usage of NSAID analgesics. And an index greater than 8% predicts better joint comfort, and the trials indicate, the meta-analyses indicate, that more than 2 grams a day work better than lower amounts. So 2 grams a day of EPA plus DHA would require 7 of the soft gels, the big soft gels from Costco or Kirkland. For muscle mass, as people get older, particularly if they don't exercise, they tend to lose muscle mass and develop this condition called sarcopenia. And in a study that tracked well over 1,600 seniors, it was found that those taking EPA and DHA had less loss of mobility. For inflammation all around the body, that's measurable by the levels of C-reactive protein and or by the levels of interleukin-6. These are both well-recognized biomarkers for inflammation. And meta-analyses of more than 38 trials indicate that EPA and DHA supplementation are associated with lowering of CRP and IL-6. And for immunity, we can't call them immune boosters, but we can call them immunity facilitators or immunity normalizers. And so the European Academy of Allergy and Clinical Immunology recommends that people take EPA and DHA for allergy. So practically every organ system is likely to benefit from supplementation with rather high levels of EPA and DHA. So meta-analyses found that intakes at 2,200 milligrams a day of EPA and DHA worked better for mood. And for anxiety, intakes of greater than 2,000 milligrams a day worked better. Now, the parties that promote fish oils will say, fish oil, 1,000 milligram. Well, okay, so maybe it's 1,000 milligrams of oil in a soft gel, but out of that 1,000 milligrams, very often there's only 300 milligrams of EPA and DHA. So all of my numbers here are for EPA plus DHA. The rest of the stuff doesn't matter a whole lot. In a double-blind trial with healthy women, basically postmenopausal, tracked for 6 months, 2,200 milligrams a day of the same ratio that we have slowed loss of both gray matter and white matter, improved their cognitive function, raised their index from 8.0 to 9.7. Now, here's a population then that came into the trial with a pretty good index, a threshold good index, averaging 8.0. So you might ask, well, okay, they're at 8. So, why bother to offer them more? Why expect them to get further improvement or further function from taking additional amounts? But in this case, raising the index to close to 10 did improve cognitive function. And that's a theme that has emerged now, that we may want to be getting, we probably want to get to 10 at least. So Clemens von Schacke, who is the co-discoverer of the omega-3 index with Dr. Bill Harris, recommends about 2,700 milligrams a day for pregnant women, which should get their index to 10%. And, start the earlier the better. And really, women of reproductive age should be started on EPA and DHA. Because if they do get pregnant, and most women don't realize they're pregnant for at least 3 to 4 months, by the time they realize they're pregnant, the heart and the neural tube are beginning to form. So it's a very good idea for women of reproductive age to have their index running high, and they're going to be getting all sorts of other benefits as well. And then if they do get pregnant, they can just segue into the pregnancy process with the confidence that they're sufficient in omega-3s. So the research supports that we focus on raising the index rather than on following intake recommendations. Agencies all around the world have made intake recommendations for omega-3s, but these recommendations vary from around 200 milligrams a day up to 1,000 milligrams a day or so. And they really miss the mark. And I think it's because these agencies don't really get it in terms of how the omega-3s work, how they really work, and just how much they can offer for health. So are Americans getting enough? I think you already know the answer, but let me give you some numbers. In the United States, the average index ranges around 5.3%, and more than 9 in 10 adults don't get enough EPA and DHA. That is, they're not getting enough to raise their index to 8. Pregnant women range from 4.3 to 5%, and they only average 60 milligrams per day of EPA and DHA. It's really quite sad because the evidence is very clear now that the EPA and DHA status of a child, of a newborn child, is predictive of that child's development, not only up to age 2, but up to age 4, maybe up to age 7, and can put that child at risk of having all sorts of brain issues, at least, all the way through life. So a poor omega-3 status when the brain and the rest of the body are setting up, are getting organized in the womb, can have lifelong consequences. We know this for other nutrients. We know it for zinc, for example. But it's really sad. And as Daniel mentioned early on, we have a lot of educating to do. So children with problems, children with ADHD or autism range from 3% down to 1% on their index. Individuals with cardiovascular problems, problems with memory, mood, or behavioral issues, including inappropriate aggressiveness, suicidal tendencies, overall negative personality, tend to average 3% and sometimes lower. Vegans, very interesting population, measured at 2.71%. And infants being breastfed by vegan mothers can have 1/3 the index of mothers who are eating animal foods as well as plant foods. There are ways around this that we can talk about. But vegans and vegetarians really need to be educated about what they're facing. So how do the omega-3s really work? Well, some of you have heard me go on and on about cell membranes. I did cell membrane research for my PhD, and I've always been fascinated by cell membranes. And cell membranes carry out most of the metabolic activity in our cells and throughout our tissues and organs. So the basic cell membrane is a double sheet of phospholipids. So the phospholipids are those yellow molecules, the molecules with yellow heads and with purple heads and yellow tails. And then the brown bodies in there are proteins which depend on a certain degree of fluidity of those phospholipid layers in order to be able to carry out their functions. So the most healthy cell has membrane systems that have a semi-fluid nature so that the proteins can move from side to side in the membrane. They can wobble, they can spin, they can sometimes even flip, they change shape, etc. And the fatty acids, those yellow tails, are what determine to the greatest extent how fluid the membrane can be, and therefore how efficient the membrane can be. There's antioxidants in the membrane as well, things like vitamin E and lutein and zeaxanthin and other stuff that we have in the multiple. And the main fluidizing fatty acid, the main fatty acid class that gives fluidity to cell membranes and therefore regulates their efficiency to a large extent, is the omega-3s. Now, I thought of you with this one, Daniel, because it's been confusing for a lot of us for a long time. I read it all the time. The brain has 60% fats. Just not true, unfortunately. So fats are lipids, but many lipids are not fats. So on the left, that blue structure is a triglyceride. That's a fat. That's 3 fatty acids hooked onto a molecule of glycerol. So this is the form in which fats exist in oils, for example, and this is the form in which fats are stored in our adipose tissue. But in order to make cell membranes, the triglyceride structure is transformed into a phospholipid structure, which typically has only 2 fatty acids. It does have glycerol, but then it has a head group. And that head group is critical because that head group determines how the membrane gets organized and how the proteins can behave. So the head group can have choline, ethanolamine, inositol, serine, which makes it phosphatidylserine, or it can have glycerol, which is also active in the membrane and which is another story. But the brain then, you might accurately say, is about 60% phospholipid. And among the fatty acids in those phospholipids, 20-some plus percent is DHA. And then a much smaller percent is EPA. So the brain then is loaded with phospholipids because the brain is loaded with cell membranes, because the cell membranes go to make the synapses by means of which the nerve cells communicate. Also, the conduction of the electrical impulse along the nerve cell axon goes through its cell membrane, and the phospholipids have a lot to do with that conduction process. So fats are storage forms of fatty acids, and phospholipids are activated forms. And as the omega-3s sit in the phospholipids in the membrane, they're giving the membrane the necessary degree of fluidity, but that's only part of the story. There are enzyme systems that exist in or near the membrane which can clip out those fatty acids and transform those fatty acids into messenger substances that carry out many different functions from cell to cell, or even travel in the blood and get to other tissues to affect all sorts of physiological functions. And when those are clipped out, they can then be metabolized into a vast range of derivatives. Now, on the top left, where it says ALA, that's alpha-linolenic acid, which is the omega-3 that vegetarians and vegans will get from land plants and which we get from oils, etc. But that doesn't get transformed into much. In fact, we don't hardly find it in membranes. And it's doubtful that it has any function in membranes or any real function in the body at all. But when it gets transformed into EPA, EPA then can be metabolized into a range of metabolites. And those tend to have very powerful anti-inflammatory effects. So EPA is actually involved in initiating healthy inflammation, but it's also involved in terminating inflammation before it gets out of control. And these metabolites have a range of functions, some of which are poorly understood, but which on a net basis amount to being strongly anti-inflammatory, as defined by down-regulating long-term inflammatory processes in the body. Now, we're about 4% efficient at converting ALA to EPA. Some of us can't convert it at all. We're practically 0% efficient, any of us, at converting EPA to DHA. And so DHA then also is metabolized to anti-inflammatories and to a different array of anti-inflammatories than EPA does. And we don't fully understand how the two of them interact, but we do know that between them, they provide very powerful protective effects for the brain and for every cell, tissue, and organ in the body. So we need then to have both EPA and DHA. And if we do not have sufficient amounts of them in our cell membranes, then we're more vulnerable to getting into a scenario where an inflammatory process begins, say with a hit to the head, say a traumatic brain injury, right? And then if we're not fully equipped with the omega-3s, the inflammatory process can get into action and can continue and not be terminated. And then other fatty acids that have come in with our foods, such as omega-6 arachidonic acid, are in great excess, and they will then have an unbalanced pro-inflammatory effect. So it comes down to balance. We need omega-6 arachidonic acid for our cells, tissues, and organs to function, but we need for it to be balanced by EPA and DHA. So the index then, as Daniel introduced, is we want to aim for getting above 8. And I'm going to be proceeding quickly now to justify further why it should be probably closer to 10. And I want to tell you that the Omega Check lab test from Quest and Cleveland Heart Lab is nowhere near as well documented and justified as this index, which costs $50 to have done. So I'm very concerned about that Omega Check index. We can talk about it when the time is right. So in terms of disease risk then, a low index below 8 is associated with increased risk for poor memory, attention, executive function, and for major depression. Also linked to autism, bipolar, schizophrenia, suicide, negative and impulsive behaviors. A low index is also linked to increased risk for rheumatoid arthritis, muscle and bone problems, non-alcoholic fatty liver. A high index is linked to lower cardiovascular risks. This even the most conservative experts agree on. Up to 32% lower risk for death from heart attack, lower risk for coronary heart disease, higher blood HDL cholesterol, lower triglycerides, lower blood pressure in hypertensives. So this is some of what is at stake with the omega-3 index. Now, I think there's no better way to measure how healthy something is for us than to look at the risk of dying early if you don't have enough of it. So there was this long-term study that followed 6,501 postmenopausal women for a median time of 14.9 years. And those with an omega-3 index under 4 were set at a hazard risk of 1. Those with 4 to 8% had about a 15% lower risk, and those above 8% had about a 40%, 38% or so lower risk of death during that period. So there you have it. What about men? Well, here's a risk of an acute coronary syndrome event in acute coronary syndrome patients, mostly male. And this was done with a little bit different design, but it's the same sort of thing. So at 4 to 8% index, their odds for an acute coronary syndrome event were about 30 some percent lower. And at higher than 8% index, their odds were reduced by as much as 80%. So who would not want to bet on that? Who would not want to spend some dollars for that type of, risk coverage? So in pregnancy, then, von Schacke, who works in Germany, has made a persuasive case for a higher index. So poor omega-3 status risks premature birth and problems in childhood with vision, cognition, that is attention, behavior, learning, allergies, asthma. It can also deplete the mother. So, the mother is shunting omega-3s across the placenta, EPA and DHA, to the developing baby. The physiology is in place, so she has to give that to the baby, and she can run low. The studies indicate that very clearly, which can increase her risk for postpartum depression and probably all sorts of other problems. Since the absorption differs with the fat content of the foods, the type of food consumed, etc., it's just very important that pregnant women follow their omega-3 index. He says that about 88% of German women do not supplement, which is round about the number for American women too. And their index in Germany averages 6%. Our index in the United States averages somewhat lower, and the risk for premature birth, both in Germany and in the US, are high, higher than in many other countries. So he suggests aiming for an 8 to 11% index, but ideally for an index that's about 10. And one thing I learned from von Schacke in this very nice review that he wrote recently is that at a 16% index, there can be a real risk of bleeding. So we know that 16% is very likely too high, too much of a good thing. FDA requires that we not make label recommendations of more than 3 grams a day, and von Schacke recommends 2.7 grams per day. So the case then is that for whatever problems are going on, whatever sorts of risks we want to cover, we want to take at least 2,000 milligrams a day. And some of us want to get as close to 3 grams a day as we can. But above 3 grams a day, there are no guarantees in terms of long-term safety and in terms of bleeding risk. This is very important to understand because there are physicians out there who are giving huge doses. Now, if you get a patient who's really in trouble and has a really low index, you can have them take 5 or 6 grams or so for a month or two. But then as soon as the index is going up, you probably want to cut them back to 3 grams or a little bit less. So for this product then, we recommend 1 tablespoon daily with food, perhaps 2 tablespoons for adults, which would take it right to 3,000 milligrams. And for children ages 4 and up, a half tablespoon, which would be 750 milligrams per 40 pounds body weight, and which compares very closely to what we recommend for the omega-3 power. Now, with the kids under your medical supervision, you can give them more because you want to get their index up as quickly as you can. So nutritional health insurance then. I think this is a very, very important concept. And the way I think of it is that spending money on supplements, out of your own pocket if necessary, especially on an excellent multiple and a highly concentrated fish oil, helps you stay healthy, helps your mind and body perform at their best, lowers your risk for developing disease, and improves your chances for recovery whenever you become unwell. There are all sorts of synergies between the omega-3s and the B vitamins and the minerals and other essential nutrients that come in our NeuroVite Plus multiple. And with the NeuroVite Plus, as again, compared to cheap multiples, there's a huge difference in terms of closing the nutrient gaps in the diet. So I'm going to stop there, and then whatever little time we have left, don't leave home without your nutritional health insurance.